Let me take you on a journey, not into fairy tales of leadership or polished TED Talks, but into the gritty reality of how power truly works. Not the sugar-coated version that says, just be nice and everything will fall into place. No, I'm talking about the darker side, the part we all feel but rarely speak of, fear. The currency no one wants to admit they use, but everyone secretly respects. We're told that being liked is the key, that if we're just agreeable enough, accommodating enough, we'll win people over. But, and I know that the world doesn't work like that. It never has. It doesn't reward the endlessly patient, the endlessly forgiving, the endlessly soft. It rewards those who understand one core truth about human behavior. Fear, when used correctly, commands respect in ways love simply doesn't. That's not cynical, that's observation. And no one grasped this better than Niccolo Machiavelli. Now, before you start picturing dictators or Hollywood villains, stop. That's not what this is about. This isn't about becoming cruel or manipulative. It's about understanding a part of human psychology most people pretend doesn't exist because it makes them uncomfortable. But ignoring it doesn't make it go away. It just leaves you vulnerable. Machiavelli asked a question that's still controversial today. Is it better to be loved or feared? His answer? If you can't have both, choose fear, because fear lasts. Love is conditional. It fades. It bends when tested. But fear, real fear, rooted in consequences, that sticks. And it keeps people in check, even when they're tempted to betray you. Most people misunderstand this. They think fear means cruelty. It doesn't. Machiavelli made it very clear. A ruler must make himself feared in such a way that he avoids being hated. That line, that's where real power sits. Fear without hatred is the sweet spot. You don't want people looking for a chance to stab you in the back. You want them respecting you enough not to try. Think about the most respected people you've ever worked with or looked up to. Did you fear them? Maybe not in the scared sense, but you probably knew, deep down, not to cross certain lines. Because if you did, there would be consequences. They didn't need to yell. They didn't need to intimidate. Their reputation did the heavy lifting, and that's where this becomes tactical. Fear, when used strategically, isn't about controlling every detail. It's about creating an environment where your boundaries are understood and your standards are respected. It's about being clear on what matters and enforcing it when it matters. Not randomly, not emotionally, but decisively. That's how real leaders operate. They're not constantly putting out fires or punishing every little thing. They're consistent, calm, and clear. People don't fear their wrath. They fear disappointing them or losing access to what they provide. Because here's what Machiavelli understood way before social media and corporate politics. Reputation is power. He said it like this: men worry less about harming someone who is loved than someone who is feared. That's not a call to be cold. It's a warning. If people know there are no consequences for hurting you, they won't think twice about doing it. But if your reputation says, cross this line and there will be fallout, they pause. They calculate. That pause, that's power. And here's the irony. It's the so-called nice guys who often explode the hardest. Why? Because they've spent years being doormats. Years saying yes when they meant no. Years swallowing disrespect to avoid conflict. Until one day, they snap. They swing from people pleasers to tyrants overnight. Not because they're cruel, but because they never learned the balance Machiavelli taught. Be firm, be fair, but make it clear. Your kindness is not weakness. Now, let's get practical. How do you apply this without turning into someone you don't recognize? Strategic fear isn't about domination. It's about clear, intentional boundaries. You don't need to threaten or raise your voice. You just need to make it known, calmly, firmly, what the consequences are if someone crosses a line that matters. And the key is consistency. You don't punish every slip-up. That's insecurity. You don't act out of emotion. That's chaos. You enforce consequences only when the boundary that protects your values, your well-being, your core interests is crossed. Not everything needs a reaction. But when something does, you follow through. Not because you're angry, because you're anchored. Think about what that does to people's behavior. When your response is predictable, measured, and fair, but firm, They start adjusting themselves before they act. Psychologists call it anticipatory compliance. It means people begin self-regulating based on the expected consequences. Not because you're breathing down their neck, because they know what you stand for, and they respect the structure you've put in place. And here's something most people miss. This kind of structure doesn't make people feel oppressed. It makes them feel safe. When people know the rules, they know how to play. There's comfort and clarity. In fact, kids raised in permissive homes, where anything goes, tend to have more anxiety than those raised with clear boundaries. Why? Because chaos breeds insecurity. But structure? That creates freedom. Freedom to be yourself within the lines. Freedom to trust that everyone's being held to the same standard. So, no. Fear isn't always bad. In fact, it's often the backbone of a functional system. Look at how leaders operate today. Not dictators, but effective CEOs, managers, even creators online. They don't threaten anyone. They don't beg for loyalty. They build systems, reputational ecosystems where people know, if I cross this person, I might lose access to something valuable. Opportunity, respect, protection, status. That's modern Machiavellianism. No swords, no dungeons, just subtle, elegant consequences. The fear of missing out. The fear of being left out. The fear of disappointing someone who matters. That's the kind of fear that doesn't destroy. It disciplines. It organizes. It creates order in a chaotic world. But we have to be honest. There's a dark side here, because just like any tool, fear can be abused. It can be twisted into cruelty. History is full of leaders who turn this insight into justification for abuse. That's not what Machiavelli taught, and it's not what we're talking about. Machiavelli was describing how the world works, not how it should be abused. The difference comes down to intention. Are you using fear to protect your values, your peace, your purpose? Or are you using it to control, to dominate, to inflate your ego? Because if it's the latter, it will backfire. Fear that turns into hatred is a ticking time bomb. People will comply for a while, but they'll also be waiting, watching, hoping for your weakness. And when it comes, they'll pounce. That's why Machiavelli emphasized, be feared without being hated. It's a razor-thin line, but it's the only way this works long-term. Fear should protect your position, not poison it. So, how do you walk that razor-thin line, where fear earns you respect, but doesn't trigger resentment? The answer lies in balance. You enforce boundaries, but you also reward loyalty. You make it clear that while there are consequences for crossing the line, there are just as many benefits for staying within it. Think about the people you admire most. Not the ones who scared you into silence, but the ones who made you want to rise to their level because you didn't want to disappoint them. That's fear refined. That's fear evolved. Let's break it down even further into practical principles you can use in your daily life, at work, in leadership, in personal boundaries. First, communicate your standards clearly. Let people know what you value, what you will tolerate, and where the non-negotiables are. Don't wait until someone crosses the line. Set the line in advance. Second, follow through when someone does cross it. Don't threaten, just act, calmly, proportionally. Third, separate the action from the person. You're not attacking someone's identity. You're simply responding to behavior that violates your boundary. And finally, don't hold grudges. Once the consequence is done, let it be done. Don't stew, don't shame, move forward. That's how power becomes principled. And when you do that consistently, something fascinating happens. People begin to enforce your boundaries for you. You won't need to micromanage. Your presence, your reputation, the consistency of your standards will speak for itself. And that's when you know you've stepped into real power. Not the kind that demands compliance, but the kind that commands it naturally. But I want to address something deeper before we close. Some people will still ask, is it ethical to cultivate fear at all, even the balanced kind? And my answer is this. It's not about cultivating fear. Fear already exists in every relationship, every system, every dynamic. The question is, will you manage it consciously or let it run wild and toxic in the background? Because pretending fear doesn't exist doesn't make it go away. It just makes you blind to how others are using it against you. In healthy systems, families, friendships, companies, communities, there's always some form of accountability. There's always the risk of losing access, trust, or connection. That's fear. But when it's guided by purpose, not ego, when it's matched with rewards, not just punishment, then it becomes a force for stability, for structure, for mutual respect. But you have to use it with discipline, because not all fear is created equal. And when you apply it carelessly, that's when things unravel. When people can't predict your reactions, when your enforcement feels more like revenge than principle, you breed chaos. The moment fear becomes arbitrary, personal, or excessive, it loses its edge and creates rebellion. Just look at history. Every revolution started with leaders who crossed that line, who took Machiavellian insights and warped them into tyranny. But that's not what we're here to do. We're not here to manipulate or dominate. We're here to understand, to navigate, to protect what matters without losing who we are. Because at the end of the day, the real test of whether you've used this knowledge wisely comes not when things are calm, but when there's a crisis. When people could turn on you, do they? Or do they stay? If they stay because they fear disappointing you more than they fear any punishment, you've done it right. That's the kind of power that lasts. That's the kind of influence that endures. Machiavelli didn't want you to become feared. He wanted you to understand why fear matters, so you wouldn't be blindsided by it, so you wouldn't be naive in a world full of players. Power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. And how you use what you've learned today will say more about who you are than any title or speech ever could. So, if this video challenged your thinking, if it pushed you to confront uncomfortable truths about power, boundaries, and human nature, then I encourage you to subscribe, because this channel is about those conversations most people are too afraid to have. We go beneath the surface, into the psychology, the patterns, the mechanisms that shape our world. Like this video if you value uncomfortable honesty delivered with compassion. Share it with someone who needs to stop being a doormat and start being respected. And most of all, remember this: true power isn't about making everyone fear you. It's about making the right people think twice before ever crossing the line.